Just before the PS4 was released in November 2013, a teaser for a game called Cyberpunk 2077 that was being developed by a Polish studio was revealed. This studio went on to develop and release one of the most popular and critically acclaimed open world RPGs of all time, The Witcher 3 in 2015. It was praised for not only its main story that spanned multiple continents, but its realistic and grounded world with many side quests that felt like mini main quests and were leaps and bounds ahead of the Ubisoft fetch quests at the time. If you haven't played that game, firstly, what the hell are you doing? But secondly, those side quests fit so well into the world that even some old hag rambling about a lost pan is better than most side quests in games. And don't even get me started on the DLC. Blood and Wine and Hearts of Stone are some of the best DLCs for a game I've ever seen, and you can get the game and these DLCs for the price of a new Fortnite skin. So no wonder CD Projekt had to release Cyberpunk so early when all of this is just so dirt cheap. Anyway, I will admit that I am a fan of their games, however I will try to stay as objective and fair as possible throughout the video, as we all know Cyberpunk isn't all sunshine and daisies. You know how I mentioned this game was teased before the release of the PS4, which means during the era of the PlayStation 3? Well, it did not release until after the PS5 in 2020, where GTA had already re-released itself 3 times, and arguably it should have been longer, closer to The Last of Us' 3rd release of the first game. Anyway, grab a drink and a snack, as over this video we're going to be talking, analysing, praising and laughing about the hype, the launch and the polarizing game that is Cyberpunk 2077. The first thing I want to talk about is a thing I was blown away by with this game through its trailers and when it was released, its visuals and art style. I'll also preface this by saying that I play on an RTX 3080 and Ryzen 7 3700X, which allows me to run the game at max settings with ray tracing on, so this is all from my experience, and I know it can be vastly different on consoles and mid to low end PCs. Night City is meticulously detailed to a level that is very rarely seen in games. The only game I can think of with a similar level and scale whilst maintaining the detail is Red Dead Redemption 2, which I do think trumps Cyberpunk because of its interactivity in its world.
You're alright, boy.
Which Cyberpunk does admittedly lack. I haven't played a game with such verticality and a sense of scale in a city before, and it really does feel as though you're an ant in an anthill. The amount of colours, textures, lighting, graffiti and signage, it all looks so natural that it seems near impossible that a team of artists and designers actually put it together. The amount of advertisements and posters scattered around the game, some with adult themed content, it's integrated and placed so perfectly. Looks like what would happen if Times Square was an entire city, as the roads snake up, down and around, a breathtaking sight waiting for you at every corner. The amount of clutter, rubbish and graffiti lathering the streets gives it extra authenticity and contrasts the richer areas of the map with the more impoverished ones. The lighting in this game is what seriously brings it all to life, whether you're using ray tracing or not. The game's baked lighting looks absolutely stunning and is some of the best we've ever seen, but my god is ray tracing beautiful. It touches up everything that the baked lighting misses. The reflections are stable no matter where you are or look. The ambient occlusion is so natural that things do not look floaty or over darkened. The shadows are beautifully cast and the emissivity of different surfaces looks so organic, as not everything is shiny and reflective as it otherwise could be. I'll quickly go through some comparisons showing the difference between ray tracing on or off, and you'll see how it just brings the game to another level. The texture detail is another amazing feat. On max settings, the detail in skin, cars, and just about any surface is crazy. You can see the pores in someone's skin, the grime on a panel, or the rust on a rubbish bin. It's so high resolution that even when zooming in, it still looks good. I can go on for another 10 minutes outlining the sheer beauty of Cyberpunk's world, but I think a lot of you have played it so you understand what I'm talking about. Regardless of what you think about the game, Cyberpunk is one of the most visually immersive, dense, and breathtaking worlds out there, and is my best looking game of all time by a fair margin. I've played Red Dead 2, Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, and Dying Light 2 with full ray tracing. However, visuals are not everything when it comes to a game, especially when you have to all make it run at a playable frame rate, which is where Cyberpunk meets its match. I'm going to say something that I think and hope most people will agree with. Cyberpunk should not have been released on last gen consoles. I think that the length of Cyberpunk's development really hurt it. Because it was planned and teased in early 2012 to 13, it was definitely aimed to release at the late end of PS4 and Xbox One's lifetime. However, it seems that the scale and scope of the game kept increasing, and CDPR focused more on the high-end visuals, ray tracing, and next-gen experience, as we can see from its major upgrade from E3 2018 to release. They could not achieve their artistic vision for what they wanted Cyberpunk to be on last-gen consoles. However, it was already too far into development, and pretty much all pre-orders were on these consoles as the current-gen ones had not been released yet. To get rid of its release on last-gen after so much marketing had been done and sales had been made would be suicide. Yes, they needed to do it, but realistically it would never happen as it is a business. It was just a poorly handled and unfortunate situation for the developers and leads, and hindsight is a beautiful thing. Now onto the actual performance. On my rig it ran fairly well at launch and still does. At max settings, no ray tracing, no DLSS, at 1440p, we get around 60 to 80 FPS. With DLSS on balance, this goes up to 85 to well over 100. With ray tracing on and no DLSS, it is pretty much unplayable, literally sub 10 FPS in some areas. DLSS pushes this up to 50 to 90 depending on the region, and that's where I found the sweet spot. Cyberpunk is saved by DLSS on PC, and on consoles where it is absent, it hurts. It barely ran at low settings at 20 FPS at launch on last-gen consoles, showing just how unsuited to it the game was. Sony even removed it from the PlayStation Store for several months, something that we've never seen before. Nowadays, it is better on last-gen consoles, but still not great, and I would highly recommend waiting until you get a PS5 or Xbox Series X to buy it, as the next-gen patch really makes the game closer to what it should have been at launch, and I've seen many posts from people just surprised by how good the game is currently. I remember feeling as though the posts I was reading from people on console at launch were playing a completely different game to me, as the performance on my PC matched the visual quality and was fine, and it really shows how Cyberpunk can be two different games depending on what you are playing it on, which misled people both ways and hurt its reputation. My experience at launch was one of the best from what I read, which is probably why I played and loved the game through its buggiest and darkest times, but I still don't give it a pass because of it. Similarly, one of my favourite channels, SkillUp, did a fairly positive review and was heavily criticised because of it, but I found it to be very true to my experience given he was also playing on a high-end PC with no way of knowing the dumpster fire it was on console. Basically, playing on good hardware changes the game drastically, and you should wait until you play it on said hardware until you make a conclusion about the core game itself. It does not mean what happened at launch was acceptable by any means, but is misrepresentative of what the game is actually like. This just all further supports the argument that it should have been a next-gen only game, as the extra development time and clear goal of releasing on hardware that could properly reach their vision could have changed the entire narrative and release of the game, but we can only speculate. Right around when Cyberpunk was teased, a small game called GTA 5 was released, and it is one of the best-selling games of all time, with awesome single-player and online modes, and it still has a massive community and player base behind it today. Before I continue with this, I want to talk about the marketing and hype. Cyberpunk was made out to be the best game of all time in every category it was classified as. Best story, best open world, best RPG, best graphics, best side quest, best action-adventure game, the list just goes on and on. Basically, it was touted to be the best game of all time, a bar which is nearly impossible to hit and one of the many faults from CDPR leading up to launch. They gave players ridiculously impossible expectations, likely to drive up sales, and because their vision exceeded feasibility as I mentioned before. People expected something that was like GTA 5 and The Witcher 3 combined in a cyberpunk setting, but better in every aspect, and CDPR clung onto that idea, which in my opinion is pretty scummy, as it meant they were lying to their loyal fan base who trusted them, and had every right to given how CDPR had treated their fans in the past. This is where it comes back to when I was talking about GTA earlier. People expected Cyberpunk to have a similar interactivity and longevity as that game, and to an extent just a new and improved version of it in the Cyberpunk world. Many of my friends who weren't following the game thought this to be the case, likely due to poor marketing from CDPR. It was never meant to be GTA 2077. It has a heavy focus on story, narrative, and some RPG elements, but isn't the sandbox that GTA is, and this led many astray and definitely caused some negative perception towards the core game, bugs and technical issues aside. Additionally, casting Keanu Reeves as one of the main antagonists further fueled the hype train, as well as all the little videos released highlighting all the gameplay features. Whilst this is not something unique to Cyberpunk, CDPR exaggerated and oversold many of these features, such as the metro system shown in the E3 2018 trailer, whereas if you go to the metro system in-game, all you get is a barrier followed by a fast travel menu. Modders have actually added a metro system into the game, which makes me wonder why the devs can't add it in. Another example is the life paths that were heavily marketed. You could choose between 3 vastly different backgrounds to give your character some history and context, such as Nomad where you recently left your clan to pursue a life in Night City. This doesn't actually change the core story path, but is rather a superficial RPG element that all leads to the same end, which is unfortunate. These two are just a few of the cut or falsely marketed features that contributed to the godly hype surrounding Cyberpunk, and a part of the reason it was destined to have a controversial launch regardless of how good the game was. Now, one thing that definitely screwed up the launch of Cyberpunk was the bugs. And no matter how good the game was, it is absolutely inexcusable and arguably the thing that harmed the game's reputation the most. It's pretty much impossible for games to release without some sort of bugs. Games like Cyberpunk, Red Dead 2 and The Witcher 3 are unfathomably huge with thousands of working parts that just some things are going to slip through development and QA testing. The problem with Cyberpunk is that it wasn't just a few or just some small ones, it was both a lot and some very large bugs. Personally, I had a very mild experience with the bugs at launch. The worst I had was the character T-posing out of the car, Jackie taking forever to enter the elevator in the heist, and that bug that sent you like 100 meters back when you tried to mount to the window. The only game-breaking bug I've had was when I no-clipped through the map a few months ago, and that's after a few hundred hours of gameplay. However, at launch, players were no-clipping through the map left, right and center. There was some serious LOD issues on PS4 and Xbox One, as models and textures look like PS1 Hagrid.
A wizard, Harry.
There was random physics interactions that would just send objects spinning or flying, NPCs would despawn if you looked away then looked back, and let's not forget about the T-posing. These are just a few of the immersion-breaking issues with the game at launch, and I'm sure there were many more as CDPR had to release multiple big updates until they've reached a point now where most of the bugs have been ironed out. Videos of these ridiculous bugs went viral on the internet, as how could this game of the decade contender be so bad? The combination of poor marketing we discussed before, and these bugs absolutely nuked the reputation of the game. All the focus was on the bugs and issues that the game had, that no one really cared if the game was actually good or not, and the game itself became a bit of a meme online. People laughed at the mention of Cyberpunk and viewed it as an absolute failure, whereas in reality it is actually quite a good game, technical issues aside. Not on the level that was promised, but definitely worth a buy nowadays. The bugs that plagued Cyberpunk's launch are one of the sole reasons why it has such a negative reputation, and it is disappointing that CDPR could not be more transparent to overcome these issues, as what lies beneath the problems is a damn good game. As mentioned before, the visuals on display in Cyberpunk are second to none, and are complemented by an articulately designed open world that, despite lacking interaction, is still a thrill to cruise. Night City doesn't seem to follow any sort of structure with how it's designed, but all seems to connect up somehow. The roads snake around, leading to small alleyways that hide clubs and shops, with overpasses supporting traffic above. You can truly get lost driving around Night City, and even after hundreds of hours, I still find new places and struggle to navigate sometimes, which is rare in an open world game. I find the best way to play Cyberpunk is with a very minimal HUD so that the destination is displayed on your screen, but you have no minimap and must find your own way there. This seriously takes the game to another level as you discover all the little secrets and hidden gems that Night City covers. There was one time where I had to get to the other side of a building, but there was no way through but a random elevator. So I hop in and go to the second floor, which didn't have much, but then I end up on the bottom floor where a market that I had never seen before lay, with stairs leading up to the road where my objective was. Had I have had the minimap on, I would have never discovered this area and would have just driven the correct path until I reached the objective. Cyberpunk doesn't necessarily reward exploration with physical items, rather treating you to an immersion in the culture and visuals of Night City, which is a different kind of reward and maybe why some people dislike the open world design, which is a valid point. It gives you something to look at or read, not something to gain. However, where Night City does lack is in its interaction, which somewhat ties to what I said. At launch especially, the NPCs roaming the city were quite lackluster, their walking patterns were weird, and you would see the same NPCs within meters of each other. There are also a lot of storefronts and vendors, but all of these are just here for show. You can't actually enter, interact, or buy anything from them. It is very likely that the game wouldn't run properly if all these stores were open, but it's just kinda superficial given games like Red Dead 2 have crazy good NPC AI and interaction. Cyberpunk really challenges the player to explore the world to get the most out of it, as if you keep driving from A to B, from quest to quest, it is really just a glorified fast travel system. However, if you turn the minimap off, explore and try to navigate your way around, you will bring Night City to life and find the plethora of secrets and ground yourself in its world bursting with culture and personality. Being set in the Cyberpunk world means you are going to have a lot of combat. I mean, the crime rates in Night City are through the roof, people die with little to no consequence, there are gangs galore, and like V said in the E3 2018 trailer,
and more people living below the poverty line than anywhere else.
The combat in this game is pretty good, nothing crazy, but is certainly above par when compared to most games. There are a ton of different weapons, all that have different perks. For example, some weapons have bullets that ricochet off walls, so you can literally hit an enemy around the corner. Other energy weapons let you charge a shot that you can shoot enemies through walls, which as someone who used them a lot during my first playthrough, are very broken. The melee weapons in this game are quite satisfying, and there is a great perk tree catered to leveling up that. I used them in my second playthrough and I found it quite fun, but it got a bit repetitive as it was just a left click spam after a while. I'm currently focusing more on the quick hacking and tech-sided combat, which initially I thought was very surface level, but I'm slowly discovering its intricacies. It certainly does give you quite a lot of options when approaching combat, and when compared to other games with the shoot everyone or stealth kill, it is a fresh change to see that the tech-sided combat is able to play such a big part if you choose to use it. The guns feel really solid and are great to shoot, and my god did the animators and designers do a great job. They really nailed the mix between modern guns and advanced tech weapons, and some of them are just so sick. There's even this gun that I found in my first playthrough in an alleyway that talks to you and is some great comedic relief.
You in killing over 50 people. Stone Cold Killer mode has been deactivated. From this point on, only puppy-loving pacifist will be available. Thank you.
Why? Why is it blocked?
Opening frequently asked questions. Item: why can't I kill more than 50 people? Answer: the fuck is wrong with you? Please go see a therapist, you psycho.
Shit. Can I undo it?
Checking now. Bum bum be-dum bum bum be-dum bum.
One gripe I do have with the combat is that it is incredibly hard to aim with a controller, especially during chase scenes, so if possible use a mouse if you're on PC. The most important thing I can say is if you want to get the most out of the combat is experiment with different weapons and playstyles. Don't pigeonhole yourself down by using the same two weapons and one-shotting people through walls, trust me, it gets stale real quick. Cyberpunk was heavily pushed to be an RPG, which it is, but I feel as though some of its RPG systems lack depth, whereas others excel. It was again one of the exaggerated features, hyped up to be something it could never be. We spoke before about the character's backstory doing little other than providing context, and I think that is a prime example. Like many games, it gives you the illusion of choice and agency, as every backstory leads to the same events and choices later in the game. What I will say, however, is that the late game choices and endings are really good. There are a few different endings you can get depending on which side characters you interact and romance with, as well as what choices you make. Some of the endings are truly sad and melancholy, and really put forward ethical and moral dilemmas that we soon may face. I will say that, in true CDPR and Witcher 3 fashion, the main side quests in this game are absolutely amazing and actually tie into the main story and affect your outcome, which again, very few games do and do well like this. Gameplay wise, the RPG mechanics do range in strength. I think the skill tree is good, but lacks new abilities, rather providing a lot of stat buffs to certain builds. It does give quite a bit of variation, and you can really narrow down a build if you want, whether that be quick hacking from stealth, guns blazing, or melee. There are different specialties within each of these builds, so there is quite a bit of replayability and experimentation for the player. I haven't done too much crafting in this game. For the little I did, I found it mostly tedious and unrewarding, but I can't really comment further on that. Another really cool thing this game has is cyberware you can purchase at Ripper Docks. You can purchase things that give you basic stat buffs, but you can also get stuff that gives you a double jump, slows time, builds in mantis blades into your arms, and a timed health boost for when you're in trouble. Overall, I think Cyberpunk's RPG mechanics are generally great, but not amazing, with many options for character building and gameplay, but it doesn't exactly all work well. The narrative RPG stuff is where the game can really shine, specifically towards the end of the main storyline. In my opinion, Cyberpunk's story is very good. When combined with the also exquisite side quest writing, it makes for a drawing narrative experience. I will be discussing major spoilers for the story in this section, so skip to the time on screen if you do not wish to see them. At the beginning of the game, you undertake an enormously risky heist that will skyrocket your career in Night City if you are to pull it off. As expected, things go sideways and you end up with Johnny Silverhand, an anti-capitalist fanatic, stuck in your head. A lot of people said Keanu Reeves didn't really fit this role, but I believe he played him well. Johnny, along with the many other characters such as Jackie, Panam, and Judy, are surprisingly grounded, down-to-earth people you can relate to, given the extravagance of the world. Initially, Johnny seems like an absolute dickhead, but as the story progresses, his motivations start to become relatable and understandable. When playing, it wasn't like a lightbulb moment where the game tries to coerce you to side with Johnny through a sob story or plea. It was more gradual and prompts you to think if what he's doing is actually right. It challenges the ideals of extreme capitalism and forces you to consider what you would do in V's situation. The beauty of it is that there is no obvious or more right answer, which is a trap many narrative RPGs fall into. The ethical issues are presented extremely neutrally and well, and I honestly found it difficult to choose. Johnny is an antagonist and is no saint, and has done many immoral things and committed many crimes in order to pursue his beliefs. Whatever you do or choose, people will die and there are negative repercussions. You just have to stick with who and what you believe to be the greater good, even if it means sacrificing yourself. Greed and selfishness plagues both sides of the story in Cyberpunk, and you are at the center of it and must figure it all out. This is when I think Cyberpunk is at its strongest, when it poses moral dilemmas and forces you to consider outcomes for both V as well as the really well written side characters. Panam and Judy's questlines are some of the best character development I've seen in any game. They're both brilliantly voice acted and are honest, strong and driven, but none of it seems forced. They seem like real people just trying to make their way in this confusing world, not following any tropes, which again can be relatable to many people. Despite the overarching issues of the relic and large stakes at play, there are still many family and friendship problems which do really well to evoke emotion in the player, because they are set up so perfectly.
Stop it! Fuck! Just shut up already!
It mixes the dramatic storyline with more personal issues, which form the foundation for grounding both V and these characters, allowing you to get to know and understand them, again with it all not feeling like a forced exposition dump to make you like the characters. Additionally, the story does not overstay its welcome. It does not bloat out with forgettable characters and quests for the sake of runtime, which is a massive praise. Like I mentioned, the voice acting is top tier, except for male V, who I found to have a cringy portrayal of some of the lines, hence why I opted for female V. There is literally so much I could talk about with the story of Cyberpunk and the choices and ethical issues it touches on, as well as the characters you meet and know. It is one of its finest parts, and I can't wait for the DLC arriving sometime next year for another story grounded in this magnificent yet troublesome world. Well, after its truly polarizing launch and the first couple of years in the market, what is next for CDPR and Cyberpunk? Whilst their reputation will be damaged for quite some while, they've done well to knuckle down and fix their game, making it a great experience for anyone picking up the game for the first time on a specifically next-gen rig. CDPR have announced they are working on a DLC targeted for release next year following the launch of The Witcher 3's next-gen update. I have really high hopes for this DLC, but I've learned and I'm holding them at bay as I don't want a re-repeat of launch. I think that if they can follow in the main storyline's footsteps and put together another grounded, strong narrative-driven story, similar to what they did with Hearts of Stone in The Witcher 3, it will elevate the game and force many people to reconsider their opinions and/or play the game. There is also an anime set in Cyberpunk 2077's world releasing in September this year, another great addition to the lore and hopefully another brilliant story in the large world. Altogether, despite Cyberpunk's many unforgivable issues, especially at launch, it is honestly a very enjoyable game. Visually and narrative-wise, it is absolutely brilliant, and whilst the RPG mechanics and combat are great, it ironically became a victim of corporate greed due to the long development and vision that needed much longer to reach, as well as the very poor and misleading marketing and lies from CD Projekt Red. It will definitely be remembered in the gaming history books forever, but unfortunately not for the reasons we thought it would. But like I've said, if you're on a next-gen console or competent PC, do yourself a favour and pick up this game. Nowadays, it is definitely something you need to experience and do not want to miss out on.